Introduction. A new beginning. Alex had just moved into the apartment, a place he hoped would be a fresh start. He had lived in different cities, different apartments, but this one felt different. It was on the top floor of an old building, with large windows that offered a perfect view of the city skyline. It was peaceful, quiet, just what Alex needed after a long year. But what made this new apartment even more interesting was the fact that Alex was going to have a roommate. Now, Alex wasn't exactly thrilled about the idea of sharing his space with anyone. He had grown used to living alone, enjoying his privacy. But when he saw the rent was much cheaper if he agreed to have a roommate, he decided to give it a try. Little did he know, his new roommate was going to be anything but ordinary. Zarnak, the alien, was a being from a distant planet. Alex knew this because it had been clearly stated in the lease agreement. No humans were allowed in the building without some sort of special permission. The building owner had warned Alex that he was about to live with someone very different. But still, Alex didn't know what to expect. He had read a lot about aliens, how some were peaceful, some were aggressive, and some were just strange. But reading about them and living with one were two very different things. When Alex first met Zarnak, he was taken aback. Zarnak was tall, much taller than Alex, with smooth, silver-colored skin that shimmered faintly in the light. His eyes were large, almost too large for a human face, glowing a deep, soft green. His voice was soft but steady, and the way he spoke felt strange to Alex, like every word was carefully chosen. "Hello, Alex. I am Zarnak," the alien said as he reached out to shake Alex's hand. Alex extended his hand slowly, unsure of how to react. The handshake felt firm but slightly cold, as if Zarnak's hand wasn't quite like a human's. It didn't seem like he was trying to be intimidating, but Alex still couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He had never met an alien before, and it was hard to imagine living with someone so different. Zarnak explained that he had been living on Earth for a few months, but his presence in the building was part of a special arrangement. His species, the Zarnoids, had come to Earth to learn about human culture. They didn't mean any harm. They just wanted to understand the planet's inhabitants better. But that didn't make things any less weird for Alex. After that initial meeting, things settled into a routine. Zarnak kept mostly to himself, spending his time in his room, which was filled with strange devices Alex had never seen before. Every now and then, Zarnak would come out for a conversation, but the discussions were always about neutral topics, nothing too personal. Zarnak didn't ask many questions about Alex's life, and Alex didn't feel the need to ask about Zarnak's. The alien was polite, but distant. But as the days passed, Alex started noticing something strange. Zarnak's behavior had begun to change. At first, it was subtle, a little more fidgety, a little less focused. But soon, it became clear that something was off. One evening, as Alex returned from a late shift at work, he found the apartment filled with an odd, almost electric feeling. The air felt heavier, and there were strange flashing lights coming from under the door of Zarnak's room. "What the hell?" Alex muttered, feeling a chill run down his spine. He knocked gently on Zarnak's door, but there was no answer. The lights were still flashing, and the room felt warmer than usual. Alex hesitated but decided to check if everything was okay. When he opened the door, he saw Zarnak standing in the middle of the room, his body radiating strange energy. His eyes were glowing brighter than ever before, and his skin seemed to shimmer with a pulsing light. Zarnak turned slowly to face him. "I apologize, Alex," he said in a calm, almost apologetic tone. "I am adjusting to certain changes." "Changes?" Alex asked, trying to hide the unease in his voice. "What do you mean?" Zarnak remained quiet for a moment before speaking again. "It is the time of my species' mating season. During this period, my body undergoes changes. It is something that is out of my control." Alex's heart raced. The thought of living with an alien, especially one who was now going through an unknown biological process, was more than a little unsettling. He had no idea how to react. He didn't even know how to ask Zarnak what was going to happen next. "Will you be okay?" Alex asked, unsure if the question even made sense. Zarnak nodded, though the glow in his eyes flickered nervously. "I will be fine. But this process is difficult to explain. There are emotions that are heightened. It is not like human emotions, but I do not wish to cause you any discomfort." Alex stepped back, feeling a little overwhelmed. Right. Well, if you need anything, just let me know." Zarnak's expression softened. "Thank you, Alex. I will manage." Alex left the room, closing the door behind him. His mind was racing. He had expected a lot of things when he moved into this apartment, but an alien roommate going through a mating season was definitely not one of them. And yet, the strange behavior, the odd atmosphere in the apartment, it all started to make sense. As Alex lay in bed that night, he couldn't shake the feeling that Zarnak's strange reaction was just the beginning. He wondered how this mating season would change their relationship and whether it would lead to more surprises he wasn't ready for. All he could do was wait and watch, hoping he could handle whatever came next. Little did he know, this was just the beginning of an extraordinary journey that would challenge everything he thought he knew about life, emotion, and connection. The discovery of the aliens' culture. The following day, Alex couldn't shake the odd feeling that had settled in the pit of his stomach. Zarnak's strange behavior the night before had left him unsettled. It wasn't just the unusual glowing eyes or the flickering lights. It was the sense that something deeper, something more mysterious, was happening. What kind of alien goes through a mating season? Alex had read a little about extraterrestrial cultures, mostly for fun, sci-fi books and online forums, but none of them had prepared him for the reality of living with one. And Zarnak was no ordinary alien. He was different. Determined to understand what was happening, Alex decided to do some research. He knew that Zarnak had mentioned his species was from a far-off planet, but he didn't know much beyond that. So he sat down at his desk, pulling up his laptop and beginning his search. A quick search revealed a few interesting details about the Zarnoid species. They were known for their intelligence and advanced technology, which was far beyond what humanity had achieved. But what really caught Alex's attention was the mention of their complex reproductive cycles. Unlike humans, the Zarnoids didn't experience a simple mating season every year. They had long, unpredictable cycles where their emotions and physical needs were amplified. Their mating season could last anywhere from a few days to several weeks, depending on various environmental and biological factors. The more Alex read, the more he was drawn into the world of the Zarnoids. Their mating season was described as a time of heightened emotion, physical sensitivity, and intense energy. It was something that every Zarnoid went through, and it was deeply tied to their biological and emotional well-being. The cycle was essential to their species' survival, allowing them to form strong bonds with potential mates during this time. But the strange part was that this process wasn't entirely understood by humans. Very few interactions between humans and Zarnoids had taken place, and even fewer had involved learning about their reproductive practices. Alex was learning new things no one had prepared him for. As the hours passed, Alex found himself digging deeper, following links from one obscure article to another. There was so much to learn, and yet not enough information to fully understand what Zarnak might be going through. He couldn't even begin to imagine the kind of struggles an alien might face during such an intense biological process. Alex had a feeling that there were things Zarnak wasn't telling him, things he couldn't even explain. But Alex was beginning to understand that what was happening to his roommate wasn't just strange. It was a cultural experience, something far beyond the ordinary human comprehension. Feeling both intrigued and slightly overwhelmed, Alex closed his laptop. He sat back in his chair and let out a heavy sigh. He hadn't expected to get wrapped up in an alien's personal life, let alone be living with one who was going through something as confusing as a mating season. What was he supposed to do? How could he help? Or was he supposed to just stay out of the way? As the evening wore on, Alex couldn't stop thinking about Zarnak. He found himself walking through the apartment, glancing at the closed door of his roommate's room. The whole apartment had a strange, almost electric feeling now. It was as though Zarnak's energy had seeped into the very walls, and Alex wasn't sure how to react to it. He had spent his whole life living in a world of humans, with human relationships and human emotions. This was different. There was no guidebook for this. Zarnak, on the other hand, had seemed perfectly calm earlier. He wasn't panicking, and there were no signs of distress. But Alex couldn't shake the feeling that the alien was silently struggling with something deep inside. Maybe it wasn't just his physical body that was changing. Maybe it was his mind, too. Alex realized that Zarnak's calmness might only be on the surface. He couldn't be sure, but there was something in Zarnak's eyes, the way they seemed to glow more brightly when Alex looked at him, that suggested this was all a lot harder than Zarnak was letting on. Later that evening, Alex decided he had to ask Zarnak more about what was happening. He couldn't just keep wondering in silence. Maybe he could help in some way, even if he didn't fully understand. As Alex walked toward Zarnak's room, his heart beat a little faster. He knocked on the door, his hand shaking slightly. Zarnak. Alex's voice was low, almost hesitant. Zarnak's voice answered from the other side. "Enter, Alex." Alex opened the door cautiously and stepped inside. The room was as quiet and dim as it always was, but there was a certain weight in the air that hadn't been there before. Zarnak was standing by a strange machine, his long fingers gently pressing buttons, causing soft lights to flicker and pulse. When he saw Alex enter, he turned, his face unreadable. "I've been doing some research," Alex began, unsure of how to phrase his next words. "I learned a bit about your species and, well, about your mating season. Is there anything I can do to help? I don't really understand it, but if you need anything, just let me know." Zarnak looked at Alex, his expression softening. "Thank you, Alex. I appreciate your willingness to understand." He paused for a moment, as though considering how much to reveal. "It is not easy for me to explain, but I will try. During this time, my emotions are amplified. Every feeling is intensified. Joy, anger, sadness, and even the need for connection. It is unlike anything I have felt before. It can be overwhelming. And for that, I am sorry." Alex listened carefully, his curiosity growing with every word Zarnak spoke. He had no idea what it must be like to go through something so extreme, but it made him wonder, what else was there to learn about Zarnak's world? "I see," Alex said quietly. "But how does it affect us? I mean, can I do something to make this easier for you?" Zarnak took a deep breath, his glowing eyes flickering as if deep in thought. "It is difficult to explain. I cannot expect you to understand, as it is unlike anything you have experienced. But I will try to keep control. I will not let it affect you negatively." He paused again. "However, there may be moments when you sense my emotions more strongly. It is not something I can hide." The tension in the room seemed to grow. Alex felt it too, this invisible connection between them, the pull of Zarnak's emotions wrapping around him, making him feel things he couldn't name. The alien wasn't just sharing information. He was inviting Alex into his world, into something deeply personal. Alex nodded slowly. "I understand. I'll be here if you need to talk." Zarnak smiled, a small, grateful smile. "Thank you, Alex. That means more than you know." As Alex left the room, his mind raced. There was so much he didn't understand, but he felt like he had just stepped into a world far bigger than he had ever imagined. The strange, electric atmosphere in the apartment wasn't just the result of Zarnak's physical changes. It was a sign of something deeper, something Alex wasn't sure he was ready for, but something he knew he couldn't turn away from. And so, The strange journey between human and alien continued, each moment filled with new questions, challenges, and the unknown. Zarnak's reaction. As the days passed, Alex couldn't shake the unease that had settled in the pit of his stomach. The tension in the apartment was growing more intense with every passing moment. Zarnak had explained his species' mating season, but no amount of reading or research could truly prepare Alex for what was to come. It wasn't just the strange glowing eyes or the quiet, strange murmurs Zarnak would make late at night. It was the feeling, the invisible pressure that seemed to fill the apartment whenever Zarnak was around. Zarnak was not the same. There was no denying it. The quiet, distant roommate Alex had met in the beginning was slipping away, replaced by someone different. Zarnak seemed to move through the apartment with an unsettling energy, his steps more hurried, his breathing deeper and quicker. His usually calm demeanor had been replaced with a restlessness that Alex couldn't ignore. Alex first noticed it one afternoon when he returned from work. He opened the door to their shared apartment, and for the first time, he was hit with an overwhelming sense of heat. The air was thick with a strange, almost suffocating warmth, as if the room itself was holding its breath. He paused in the doorway, taking in the sight of Zarnak standing in the middle of the living room, his back straight and his eyes closed. Zarnak's body was trembling, just slightly, and his face was flushed. It was almost as if he was holding something in, a powerful wave of emotion, maybe, or a force that was too strong to control. His eyes flickered open as Alex stepped inside. And there it was again, the glow, brighter than before. It was as though Zarnak's eyes were no longer just a reflection of light, but something deeper, something alive. "Zarnak?" Alex asked, his voice uncertain. He hadn't seen Zarnak like this before. Zarnak didn't respond right away. His lips parted as though he were about to say something, but then he stopped himself. The air between them seemed to thrum with energy, and Alex couldn't help but feel the weight of it. He could almost feel Zarnak's emotions wrapping around him, tugging at him, pulling him in. It was too much. I am sorry." "Alex," Zarnak finally said, his voice strained. "It is happening again." Alex stepped forward, unsure of how to help. "What's happening, Zarnak? What's going on with you?" Zarnak's eyes flickered toward the floor, and for the first time, Alex saw something vulnerable in him. The calm, controlled alien he had known seemed to be slipping away, and in its place was something more raw, more human than Alex ever imagined. "I am feeling too much, Alex. The emotions are overwhelming. I cannot control them. It is as if my body is not my own. The need for connection, the pull of instincts, is strong. I did not anticipate it being like this." Alex could only stare, unsure of how to process what Zarnak was saying. He had expected Zarnak to be different during his mating season. But this was something more than just physical changes. This was about emotions, emotions that Alex had no way of understanding. He'd never felt anything like this before. "Is there anything I can do?" Alex asked, his voice quieter now. I don't really know what this is, but if you need to talk about it, I'm here." Zarnak didn't look up at first, but then his glowing eyes met Alex's. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice trembling. "It is not something I can explain easily. My species' mating season is a time of extremes. Emotions become amplified, as if the very essence of who we are becomes sharper. The feelings of desire, connection, and even fear, they all become louder, stronger. And I feel it all." Alex could hear the pain in Zarnak's voice, and for the first time, he realized just how intense this experience must be for him. Zarnak wasn't just going through a biological change. He was being overwhelmed by forces he couldn't control. Alex had never considered what it might be like to experience emotions in such an overwhelming way. For a long time, they stood there in silence, the weight of the moment hanging heavily in the air. Alex had no idea what to say next. What could he say? He was just a human, and Zarnak was an alien going through something he could barely understand. But then, Zarnak spoke again, his voice barely a whisper. "I do not want to hurt you, Alex. I do not want to bring this on you. But I cannot help what I feel. The need is too great." Alex's heart pounded in his chest. The words felt heavy, charged with meaning that he couldn't fully comprehend. There was a deep longing in Zarnak's voice, something that was both foreign and yet somehow human. It was strange how Alex could recognize this emotion even though it wasn't his own. "I'm not going anywhere, Zarnak," Alex said, his voice steady. "I don't know what you're going through, but you don't have to go through it alone. I'll be here. Just don't shut me out." Zarnak looked at him, his eyes flickering with a mixture of gratitude and confusion. "You would stay, even though you do not understand?" Alex nodded. "Yeah. Even if I don't get it, I don't want to leave you to deal with this by yourself." Zarnak seemed to consider this for a moment before he finally nodded. "Thank you, Alex. It means more than I can say." The room felt still, quiet. The tension between them, the unseen force that seemed to bind them together, was palpable. And in that moment, Alex realized that this wasn't just about the aliens' mating season anymore. It was about something deeper, about connection, about understanding, and about facing the unknown together. But just as Alex thought he might understand what was happening, Zarnak's next words threw him off balance again. "It is not just the mating season that affects me," Zarnak said quietly. "It is everything. The way my species experiences connection. Our bonds are stronger than what you may know. It's not a simple feeling. It is overwhelming, and I am afraid of what will happen next." Alex's confusion only deepened. Stronger bonds. What did that mean? He had 1,000 questions swirling in his mind, but before he could ask, Zarnak turned away, his shoulders tensing as if trying to control some internal struggle. "I will try to be calm," Zarnak said, his voice strained again. "But I am not sure how long I can hold this back." Alex watched as Zarnak walked away, retreating into his room, leaving Alex alone in the living room. The door closed softly behind him, but the heaviness lingered in the air. Alex didn't know what to expect next, but one thing was clear. Whatever was happening to Zarnak was more complicated than either of them had imagined. The apartment had changed. The simple routine Alex had come to expect was gone. And with it, something deeper had emerged, something that Alex wasn't sure he was ready to face. But one thing was certain. Whatever happened next, he was in it now. The confrontation. The days following Zarnak's emotional outbursts were tense. Alex could feel the strange energy that lingered in the apartment every time Zarnak was near. He would find his roommate pacing quietly around the apartment late into the night, eyes flickering with an intensity that Alex couldn't ignore. It was clear that Zarnak was still struggling to control the powerful emotions swirling inside him. But despite their silent tension, Alex wasn't sure how to approach him. How do you talk to someone who is going through something so alien, so beyond your understanding? One evening, as the soft golden light of sunset filtered through the apartment, Alex sat in the living room, nervously tapping his fingers on the armrest. He couldn't take it anymore. The silence between them had become unbearable. The constant feeling of something unsaid was hanging heavily in the air. He had to know more. He had to understand what Zarnak was going through. And he couldn't keep letting it go unspoken. With a deep breath, Alex stood up and walked toward Zarnak's room. This time, instead of hesitating, he knocked firmly on the door. "Zarnak," he called out, his voice steady but laced with uncertainty. The door opened almost immediately. Zarnak stood in the doorway, his expression neutral but his glowing eyes betraying a flicker of emotion. His posture was stiff, like he was bracing himself for something. Something that had yet to be said, but that was already weighing heavily between them. "Alex," Zarnak said, his voice soft, almost a whisper. I did not want to disturb you further." Alex looked into Zarnak's eyes, trying to read the emotions behind them. There was something deep and complicated hiding behind those eyes, something that spoke of pain, confusion, and the weight of emotions that were too heavy to carry alone. "No," Alex said, shaking his head. "I think it's time we talk. We've been dancing around this long enough." Zarnak's eyes shifted slightly, but he didn't say anything. Alex could sense the struggle within him, the alien's need to retreat, to hold everything in, and yet the pull to open up. It was as though Zarnak was afraid of being vulnerable, afraid of letting Alex too close. But Alex couldn't stand it anymore. He had to know what was happening to his roommate, to the alien who was now sharing his life, his space. "Look, I get it," Alex said, his voice more firm now. "You're going through something I can't understand, but you don't have to keep it all inside. I'm here, Zarnak. I want to help if I can, but you have to let me in. You can't keep shutting me out." Zarnak's eyes widened slightly at the force in Alex's words, as if the human's directness had caught him off guard. For a long moment, Zarnak stood in the doorway, silent. The air between them crackled with tension, each of them standing in a space where words felt heavy, and the next step seemed impossible. Finally, Zarnak stepped back, allowing Alex to enter the room. It was the first time Alex had been in Zarnak's personal space, and as he looked around, he was struck by the unfamiliar objects scattered across the room. There were strange devices that hummed quietly, glowing with soft light, and the walls were covered with intricate patterns Alex couldn't begin to decipher. The room felt both alien and strangely intimate, as though Zarnak had created a space that was both his and something far beyond human understanding. Zarnak motioned for Alex to sit, and Alex did so, his heart pounding. The moment of confrontation had arrived. "I am sorry, Alex," Zarnak said, his voice more strained now. "I did not mean to pull away from you. But the emotions, they are overwhelming, as I have said. I cannot control them, as I would like to." Alex studied Zarnak carefully, sensing the alien's deep struggle. It was clear that Zarnak had been holding back more than just his emotions. There was a wall between them, one built of fear, of vulnerability, of a deeply rooted need to protect himself. Alex understood that now. Zarnak wasn't just an alien trying to survive a difficult biological cycle. He was a being facing something far more personal, the fear of being overwhelmed by emotions he couldn't fully understand, and the fear of letting someone else witness that turmoil. "I don't want to push you, Zarnak," Alex said slowly, his tone softer now. "But if you keep this inside, it's only going to get worse. I don't know what it's like to go through what you're going through, but I know you don't have to do it alone." Zarnak looked at him, his glowing eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and hesitation. It was clear that the alien was torn between the deep desire to be understood and the instinct to keep his vulnerability hidden. But there was something about Alex's sincerity, his willingness to stand by him despite everything, that made Zarnak pause. "I have never been this exposed," Zarnak confessed, his voice barely a whisper. "In my species, we do not show weakness. We do not share our struggles. But here, with you, I feel it. The urge to share it. The fear of what will happen if I don't." Alex's heart went out to Zarnak. He had no idea what it must feel like to carry such a heavy burden, to be constantly overwhelmed by emotions that were far beyond his control. But there was one thing Alex could understand, the fear of being alone with that burden. "You don't have to keep it to yourself," Alex said gently. "I'm not going anywhere, Zarnak. Whatever you're going through, I'm here. We're in this together, okay?" Zarnak's eyes flickered again, his expression softening for a brief moment. It was the closest thing to relief Alex had seen in him since they met. Zarnak took a deep breath, as if gathering his strength, and for the first time in days, he allowed himself to let go. "The truth is, I am afraid, Alex," Zarnak admitted, his voice breaking slightly. "I fear that the emotions will consume me, and I will lose myself in them. I fear that I will not be able to control them. I do not wish to hurt you. I do not want to cause chaos." Alex's chest tightened with empathy. Zarnak wasn't just afraid of the biological effects of his mating season. He was afraid of losing control, of not being able to manage the intense emotions that were taking over his mind and body. Alex could understand that. It was a universal fear, the fear of being overwhelmed by something you couldn't control. "You're not going to hurt me, Zarnak," Alex said softly. "I'm not afraid of what you're going through. I'm just trying to understand. That's all." Zarnak met his gaze, his eyes searching Alex's face for any signs of doubt. But all he saw was sincerity. Slowly, he nodded, as if a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. "Thank you," Zarnak said, his voice a quiet breath of relief. I have never had someone to speak to about this. It feels better to not carry it alone." Alex smiled, the tension in the room finally beginning to ease. The confrontation had been difficult, but it had also opened the door to understanding. There were still so many unknowns between them, but for the first time, Alex felt like they were starting to bridge the gap. They weren't just two strangers from different worlds anymore. They were two beings, sharing a moment of vulnerability and connection. But as Alex stood to leave, he couldn't help but feel that the hardest part of this journey was still ahead of them. Zarnak's emotions weren't something that could be easily fixed. There was still a long road ahead, filled with challenges and moments of uncertainty. But for now, they had taken the first step. And that was all that mattered. The unexpected surprise. In the days that followed their heart-to-heart conversation, Alex couldn't shake the strange sense of anticipation that seemed to hang in the air. He had made a promise to Zarnak, to be there, to try to understand, and to not let the alien face his overwhelming emotions alone. But even with all the promises, Alex couldn't escape the growing uncertainty. What would happen next? Would Zarnak be able to control the chaos inside him? And more importantly, what if Alex found himself too caught up in it all? Zarnak, for his part, had made an effort to be more open, but there was still a certain distance between them, the lingering wall that Alex couldn't quite break through. Zarnak had become quieter, retreating into himself at times, and Alex wasn't sure if that was because of his struggles with the mating season, or if he was simply trying to protect Alex from the intensity of what he was feeling. Every now and then, Zarnak would slip into his own world, lost in his thoughts, and Alex would catch glimpses of the turmoil behind his eyes. The confusion, the fear, the loneliness. But then, something happened that neither of them expected. It started with a simple evening. The apartment was quiet, the only sound coming from the occasional hum of the strange devices in Zarnak's room. Alex was sitting on the couch, flipping through a book, trying to distract himself from the thoughts swirling in his mind. The apartment felt different now, darker somehow, more intense. It was as if the air itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to change. And then it did. Without warning, Zarnak stepped into the living room. His expression was unreadable, his body rigid. But there was something else about him, something that Alex couldn't quite put his finger on. Zarnak's usually glowing eyes were dim, almost shadowed, and his skin, which had once shimmered faintly in the light, now appeared to have a dull, almost lifeless sheen. "Alex," Zarnak's voice was soft but urgent. "I need to talk to you." Alex's heart skipped a beat. Zarnak had never sounded this serious before. The urgency in his tone immediately caught Alex's attention, and he put down his book, sitting up straighter. "What is it, Zarnak? Are you okay?" Zarnak hesitated for a moment before stepping closer. He stood still for a moment, as if gathering his thoughts, before finally speaking again. "It is happening," he said quietly, almost as if the words themselves were difficult to utter. "The emotions, the pull, it is stronger now. I cannot keep it in any longer." Alex blinked, confusion flashing across his face. "What do you mean? What's happening?" Zarnak's gaze shifted to the floor, and Alex noticed a subtle tremor in his hands. I have been holding it back, trying to keep control, but it is too much. The need is too strong, and I fear that I will lose myself in it. I do not want you to be afraid. Alex's pulse quickened. The air in the apartment felt heavier, as though Zarnak's words were sending ripples through the very fabric of their shared space. Zarnak had always been distant about his feelings, but now, the vulnerability in his voice was unmistakable. He was no longer trying to protect Alex from the truth. He was asking for help, even if he didn't fully understand what that meant. Before Alex could respond, something strange happened. Zarnak's eyes flickered, and for a brief moment, they glowed brighter than Alex had ever seen. The glow wasn't just the faint light he had become accustomed to. It was intense, almost blinding. And then, as quickly as it had appeared, it faded. Zarnak seemed to collapse inward, his shoulders hunched, his breathing shallow. Alex stood up, his mind racing. He had seen Zarnak struggle with his emotions before, but this was different. There was an energy in the room now, something that felt primal, almost electric. The air felt charged, and Alex couldn't ignore the strange pull in his chest, the sense that Zarnak's struggle wasn't just physical, but emotional. The connection between them had deepened, and it was becoming clearer than ever that what Zarnak was going through wasn't something Alex could easily understand. Without thinking, Alex crossed the room to Zarnak, his steps slow but determined. Hey, look at me," Alex said gently, his voice steady. He reached out, placing a hand on Zarnak's shoulder. "I don't know what's going on, but I'm not leaving you. You don't have to go through this alone." Zarnak's eyes slowly lifted to meet Alex's, and there was something in them now, something raw and desperate. "Alex, I feel it. The pull, the need. It is not just biological. It is everything. I cannot explain it. My species bonds with one another during this time, but I did not anticipate how overwhelming it would be. I fear losing myself in it, and the thought of dragging you into this is unbearable." Alex could feel the weight of Zarnak's words pressing down on him. There was no mistaking it now. Zarnak wasn't just struggling with a simple biological cycle. He was caught in a deep emotional crisis, one that was threatening to overwhelm him. And in some strange way, Alex felt the pull too. There was something about Zarnak's vulnerability, the intensity of his emotions, that was calling to Alex in a way he couldn't explain. It wasn't just sympathy, it was something deeper, a connection that Alex couldn't deny, even if he didn't fully understand it. "I'm not afraid, Zarnak," Alex said, his voice firm but gentle. "You don't have to do this alone. We're in this together, remember." Zarnak looked at him, his expression softening slightly. For the first time, Alex saw something other than fear or confusion in the alien's eyes. There was a flicker of relief, of hope, and that, more than anything else, made Alex realize just how much Zarnak needed him. The alien wasn't just afraid of his own emotions. He was afraid of being alone in them, of being consumed by the storm that raged inside him. But as Alex stood there, his hand still resting on Zarnak's shoulder, a sudden surge of energy seemed to pulse through the room. Zarnak's body tensed again, his eyes flashing with a bright, almost blinding light. This time, the glow didn't fade. It intensified, growing stronger with every passing second. Alex's heart raced as he felt the pressure build in the room, the strange, electric pull between them becoming almost unbearable. And then, without warning, Zarnak let out a quiet, almost imperceptible sound, a noise that was part sigh, part gasp. His eyes closed briefly, and when they opened again, there was something different in them. I do not know what is happening," Zarnak whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "But I feel connected to you, Alex, more than I ever thought possible. It is as if I have been searching for something, and you are the answer." The words hung in the air, thick with unspoken meaning. And in that moment, Alex realized something something both terrifying and beautiful. The connection between them had shifted. It wasn't just about Zarnek's struggle anymore. It was about them. Two beings from entirely different worlds, caught in something neither could fully understand. But one thing was clear: whatever came next, they would face it together. The strange energy, the overwhelming emotions, the growing bond. It was all part of something much bigger than either of them had anticipated. And for better or worse, Alex knew that this was only the beginning of something that would change both of their lives forever. The realization. The days after the unexpected surge of energy were marked by a strange silence that fell between Alex and Zarnek. The apartment, once filled with an undercurrent of tension, now seemed quieter, as if both were waiting for something to break the stillness. Zarnek had withdrawn once again, his emotions still raw but now tempered with a sort of cautious restraint. The intensity that had consumed him seemed to have subsided, at least for the moment. But the unease between them had shifted. Alex couldn't shake the feeling that things were different now. The connection he had felt with Zarnek, a bond that had been deepening in ways he couldn't fully understand, was undeniable. And yet, it was also terrifying. What had happened that night? What had Zarnek meant when he said he felt connected to Alex? Was it just the alien's mating season messing with his emotions, or was there something more to it? For the first time since moving in, Alex wasn't sure how to act. He had never signed up for this, not this kind of bond. They were two completely different beings, two species that had no reason to be anything more than strangers in the same space. But now, every time Alex looked at Zarnek, his heart seemed to beat just a little faster. It was as if the very presence of the alien was pulling something out of him, something he didn't know existed until now. But then, just as the quiet became unbearable, Zarnek approached him one evening, his steps measured and careful. Alex looked up from his book, startled by the sudden movement. For a moment, they stood there in silence, the air between them thick with the unspoken words neither of them seemed able to voice. "I've been thinking," Zarnek said softly, his voice steady but with an undercurrent of vulnerability that Alex hadn't heard before, "about everything, about the bond between us." Alex's heart skipped a beat. It was the first time Zarnek had directly addressed the feelings that had been swirling between them. It felt like the moment they had both been avoiding had finally arrived, and Alex wasn't sure if he was ready for it. "What bond?" Alex asked, his voice betraying a mixture of curiosity and caution. He wasn't sure if he even wanted to hear the answer. Zarnek met his gaze, his glowing eyes flickering as if searching for the right words. "I feel something, Alex. It is not like anything I have felt before. My species experiences strong bonds during mating season, but this is different. This connection, it is stronger than I anticipated, and I believe you feel it too." Alex's mind raced. He had felt it. He couldn't deny it. The pull toward Zarnek had grown stronger in the past few days. But could this really be more than just the effects of the mating season? Could it be something real, something beyond the biological urges that Zarnek had so carefully explained to him? I don't know what to say," Alex admitted, his voice quiet. "I never imagined something like this would happen. I mean, I'm just human, and you're not. This bond, is it just because of what you're going through, or is it something else?" Zarnek's eyes softened as he stepped closer, his presence almost overwhelming. "It is not just the mating season, Alex. I can feel it in my core. There is something between us that goes beyond biology. I have never experienced anything like this in my life." Alex's pulse quickened, the weight of Zarnek's words settling in. The alien wasn't just talking about a passing connection, or the fleeting emotions of mating. It was something deeper, something that seemed to touch the very essence of who they were. And in that moment, Alex realized that what he was feeling wasn't just an effect of Zarnek's season. It was something that existed outside of their differences, something that neither of them had anticipated. "I didn't ask for this," Alex whispered, his voice barely audible. But I can't deny that. I feel it too. I don't understand it, but I can't ignore it either." Zarnak's expression softened, and for a brief moment, his glowing eyes flickered with something like relief. "I am glad that you do not turn away from it, Alex. I feared that you would." The silence between them was thick now, each of them processing the weight of what they had just shared. Zarnak's emotions were still raw, and Alex could feel the struggle within him, the constant battle to stay grounded, to maintain control. It was clear that Zarnak had been fighting a battle on two fronts, one against his own biology and the overwhelming emotions that came with it, and the other against the fear of opening himself up to someone else. "I don't know what to do with this, with what I'm feeling," Alex admitted, his voice filled with uncertainty. "This is all so new. I've never felt anything like this before." Zarnak nodded slowly, his eyes filled with understanding. "I do not know what to do with it either. But I am willing to explore it. With you." Alex swallowed hard, his mind spinning. The implications of what Zarnak was saying were enormous. They weren't just roommates anymore. They weren't just two beings sharing space and time. They were bound by something neither of them could fully comprehend. And yet, in that moment, Alex didn't want to fight it. The connection was too strong, too undeniable. He couldn't turn away from it, even if he didn't understand it. I guess we take it one step at a time," Alex said, his voice steadier now. "We figure this out together." Zarnak smiled, a small tentative expression that made something stir in Alex's chest. "Together," he agreed quietly. "That is all I ask for." For the first time in days, the air between them didn't feel heavy. The tension had shifted, replaced by a quiet understanding. Alex could feel the weight of the bond between them, but it no longer felt like something to fear. It felt like something that could be explored, something that could be shared, even if they didn't know where it would lead. As the night wore on, Alex couldn't help but reflect on how far they had come, how strange, how complicated, and yet how beautiful their journey had become. They were two beings from different worlds, connected by something neither of them had expected. And though they couldn't yet understand the full scope of what was happening, one thing was certain: their connection was real. And for now, that was enough. The realization of what lay ahead loomed large, but for the first time, Alex felt ready to face it. Together, they would navigate the challenges, the unknowns, and the complexities of their bond. Whatever came next, they would walk that path side by side, finding their way through the uncertainty of it all. The resolution. The days following their conversation had a strange sense of calm. The apartment, once filled with an electric tension, now felt different, lighter, as if the air had cleared, leaving room for something new. Zarnak, though still going through his species mating season, seemed to have found some measure of peace. The overwhelming emotions that had once seemed so uncontrollable now appeared more manageable, as if both he and Alex had begun to come to terms with the bond between them. It wasn't perfect, and it certainly wasn't easy, but it was something they could navigate together. And that, in itself, was a victory. For Alex, the last few weeks had been an emotional roller coaster. He had stepped into a world he never thought possible, a world where the boundaries of what he understood as normal were constantly being tested. But in the midst of all the confusion and fear, he had found something unexpected: connection. A deep, undeniable connection with someone who, on the surface, seemed nothing like him. Zarnak wasn't just an alien with strange biology and overwhelming emotions. He was someone who had shared his fears, his vulnerabilities, and his longing for understanding. And in turn, Alex had opened up to him in ways he hadn't with anyone else in years. They were, in a strange way, more alike than Alex could have ever imagined. Zarnak, for his part, had begun to open up in ways he never had before. The alien, who had once been distant and reserved, was now more relaxed in Alex's presence. He shared more of his thoughts, his fears, and his experiences, things Alex hadn't even known to ask about. Zarnak spoke of his home planet, his people, and their ways. He explained the complexities of his species' emotions, how their connections with each other were deeply intertwined with their biology, and how difficult it was for him to find a balance between his natural instincts and the deeper emotional connections he was now forming with Alex. It was an ongoing learning process for both of them, but they were no longer afraid of what they might discover along the way. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a soft golden glow over the city, Alex and Zarnak sat together in the living room. The quiet had settled comfortably between them, the kind of silence that felt natural rather than uncomfortable. Zarnak had been particularly calm that evening, his usual nervous energy subdued. His eyes, which had once flickered with an almost frantic intensity, now seemed steady, and there was a softness in his gaze that Alex had come to recognize as a sign of trust. "I've been thinking," Zarnak began, his voice steady but reflective, "about everything that has happened, about how we've changed." Alex looked over at him, meeting his gaze. "Yeah, I've been thinking about that too. A lot has changed, hasn't it?" Zarnak nodded slowly, his long fingers tracing the edge of his cup. "I never expected any of this. I did not anticipate feeling so connected to you. My people do not bond this way, not with other species. I thought I would remain isolated during this time, but you have made me see that I do not have to be." Alex felt a wave of emotion wash over him. It wasn't just sympathy. It was understanding, something deeper than he had felt before. He had never thought about how lonely it must have been for Zarnak, someone who was so different, so far from his home. To feel isolated, even in a world full of people, was something Alex understood all too well. But now, in a way, they were no longer alone. They had each other. "I don't think either of us expected this," Alex said quietly. "I don't think either of us thought we'd get to this point, but here we are, right?" Zarnak's eyes softened, and there was a quiet sincerity in his voice when he spoke again. "Here we are. And I am grateful, Alex. I did not think that this would be possible, that I would find someone who understands me, who is not afraid of my differences." Alex smiled, his heart lifting in a way he hadn't expected. The journey had been strange, unpredictable, and often uncomfortable, but it had also been transformative. They had learned more about each other than either of them could have anticipated, and in the process, they had forged a bond that went beyond their differences. It wasn't perfect, and they knew they had a long road ahead, but it was real, and that was enough. "I'm glad too," Alex said softly. "I never thought I'd have an alien roommate, let alone one that I actually care about. But I do. I care about you, Zarnak." Zarnak's eyes glowed with a mixture of relief and something else, something warm, something that made Alex feel like they had reached a new level of understanding. "And I care about you, Alex, more than I ever thought possible. I have learned that it is not just about surviving this cycle of emotions. It is about finding someone who can see past the surface, someone who can accept me, even when I do not understand myself." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their words settling between them. And for the first time, Alex didn't feel like an outsider in Zarnak's world. They had crossed a threshold, one that had started with fear and confusion, and had slowly transformed into something beautiful. The fear of the unknown, the fear of their differences, had given way to something stronger: trust. Zarnak looked up at the sky outside, his gaze distant for a moment, before he spoke again. I think this is the beginning of something new. Not just for me, but for us. We have learned to accept what we cannot control, and in doing so, we have found something far greater than either of us expected." Alex nodded, his chest swelling with a sense of peace he hadn't known was possible. They were no longer just two beings from different worlds. They were two individuals who had found common ground, who had chosen to face the unknown together. It wasn't the easiest path, and it wasn't without its challenges, but it was theirs, and that made all the difference. Zarnak turned back to Alex, his eyes gleaming with a quiet joy. "I do not know what the future holds, but I know that I am no longer afraid to face it. Not as long as you are by my side." Alex smiled, a warm feeling spreading through him. "I feel the same way, Zarnak. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." And so, with that unspoken promise hanging between them, they knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever obstacles they would have to overcome, they were no longer alone. They had found a connection that transcended their differences, something that could not be broken by fear or uncertainty. And together, they would face whatever came next, hand in hand, ready to embrace the future they had forged together.